Today on Don't Talk TV, I'm going to talk about a controversial police investigation technique called Mr. Big. Hello, my name is Nicholas Wansbutter. I'm a criminal defense lawyer in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, and welcome to Don't Talk TV. In response to my Innocent Till Proven Guilty video, a viewer who goes by the name Mr. Miracle 1971 posted a question. It was a very good question. I thought it was worthy of a full video to answer rather than just an answer in the comments section. So Mr. Miracle 1971's question is, what is your legal opinion on the Mr. Big scam by the R.C.M.P? So, first of all, thank you, Mr. Miracle 1971, for watching Don't Talk TV, and thank you for posing a question and giving me a suggestion for a video topic. Before I get into my personal opinion on the Mr. Big technique, a little bit of background on what exactly that is. So, the Mr. Big investigative technique is also called the Canadian technique because it was designed by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in British Columbia in the 1990s. Apparently it's been used in over 350 cases, and the police claim that 75% of those have resulted in the the suspect being either cleared or being charged and ultimately convicted. So what the technique is it's used in unsolved crimes where the police have run out of leads, and they will create a fake criminal enterprise. This technique specifically targets lonely, socially isolated individuals, people who are poor and easily susceptible to the technique. So what it involves is, first they'll keep the suspect under surveillance for a significant amount of time to get to see their patterns of behavior, where they come and go, what they tend to do, what they're interested in. Then they will insert one of the undercover operatives into their life, seemingly by accident. They'll pretend to accidentally bump into each other. Often they'll have that person do a favor for the accused or set it up so that the accused might help them out, and then they'll say, okay, well, I'm going to help you out in return. I can get you some work. The work, of course, being criminal work. So they'll give these individuals money to count money, carry a bag and deliver it somewhere, and they slowly ramp up the criminality until then they'll pretend, okay, we're going to let you in on this organization. You know, we think you've got what it takes. We're going to bring you in, but you need to speak to Mr. Big, who's the leader of the criminal gang. He's going to check out whether you're worthy, and they'll impress upon the person that, look, you need to make a good impression with this guy. You need to show that you're a bad dude. And they will try to pressure the person into confessing to having done a murder or whatever crime is being investigated, but usually it's in the case of murder cases. Now, this technique, it's called the Canadian technique because it's developed by the R.C.M.P. I suspect it's also called the Canadian technique because it is not used in the United States. In fact, it's forbidden to be used in the United States. In Canada, the Supreme Court has allowed this technique to be used with some reservations. And I should note that there have been a number of wrongful convictions that have resulted from this technique. So the Supreme Court decision is Her Majesty the Queen and Hart, a 2014 decision of the Supreme Court of Canada, and the judgment was given by Justice Moldaver. At paragraph 84, Justice Moldaver lays out the test that the Supreme Court will go on to adopt for allowing evidence of the Mr. Big technique to be presented to a jury in a trial. So the solution he has, he said, this solution involves a two-pronged approach that one recognizes a new common law rule of evidence and two relies on more robust conception of the doctrine of abusive process to deal with the problem of police misconduct. The first prong recognizes a new common law rule of evidence for assessing the admissibility of these confessions. The rule operates as follows. Where the state recruits an accused into a fictitious criminal organization of its own making and seeks to elicit a confession from him, any confession made by the accused to the state during the operation should be treated as presumptively inadmissible. This presumption of inadmissibility is overcome where the Crown can establish, on a balance of probabilities, that the probative value of the confession outweighs its prejudicial effect. It starts off as inadmissible, The Crown has to satisfy the court that it can be admitted only if the probative effect, meaning its ability to prove that which the Crown is seeking to prove, in other words, its ability to prove that the person actually did it, outweighs the prejudicial effect, and prejudicial effect being the danger of wrongful conviction, the danger of conviction for wrong reasons, and other dangers that Justice Moldaver goes through a bit further on, and we'll look at quickly. And then Justice Moldaver says, as regards to the second prong, I would rely on the doctrine of abusive process to deal with the problem of police misconduct. The doctrine of abusive process, it's if the police conduct or Crown conduct is something that the members of society just simply do not find acceptable, it offends people's concept of quote-unquote fair play, then evidence will be excluded. At paragraph 91, why does the Crown bear the onus of establishing that the probative value of the Mr. Big confession outweighs its prejudicial effect? Justice Moldaver indicates that the onus is justified because of the central role played by the state in creating these confessions. It is the state that designs and implements these operations, expending significant resources and acting as puppeteer in the production of the accused's ultimate confession. The state creates a potent mix of a potentially unreliable confession accompanied by prejudicial character evidence. It goes on to say at paragraph 94, placing the onus on the Crown also works to address concerns with abusive state conduct. Confronted by the reality that the Crown will ultimately bear the burden of justifying reception of a Mr. Big confession, the state will be strongly encouraged to tread carefully in how it conducts these operations. Then just quickly to look a little bit at how is the probative value and prejudicial effect assessed. Paragraphs 94 and following discuss the probative value assessment. Paragraph 95, the court said, how are trial judges to assess the value of evidence? This requires more than asking whether the evidence is logically relevant. It necessitates some weighing of the evidence. After all, probative means tending to prove an issue, and questionable evidence will have less of that tendency. The strength of the evidence, whether there's some believability. So, for example, there's a case that followed the case of Hart, that being Her Majesty the Queen and Mac. And in that case, it was a situation where the body of the deceased person had never been found. Mr. Mac gave a confession to Mr. Big saying that he'd shot this person and buried them at a certain location. And when police went and searched that location, they found the body burned and buried, as the person had said, and with gunshot wounds. So in that particular case, the court found there were circumstances that showed this was a true confession because he couldn't have known those details unless he had been in on the murder. Then at paragraph 106, the court discusses how to weigh the prejudicial effect. And it says that admitting these confessions raises the specter of moral and reasoning prejudice. Concerning the moral prejudice, the jury learns that the accused wanted to join a criminal organization and committed a host of simulated crimes that he believed were real. In the end, the accused is forced to argue to the jury that he lied to Mr. Big when he boasted about committing a very serious crime, because his desire to join the gang was so strong. Moral prejudice may increase with operations that involve the accused in simulated crimes of violence, or that demonstrate the accused has a past history of violence. So in other words, there's a risk that the jury is going to convict a person just because they think he's a bad person, not because he actually did the crime. Just to circle back and summarize, the Supreme Court in Canada does say that these operations, confessions from these operations, are presumptively inadmissible, and the Crown has to convince the court to allow it to be used in evidence. And there's the two-part test that they have to follow. And the key being that the probative value has to outweigh the prejudicial effect. Now, as for my opinion, I, with the greatest of respect, disagree with the approach of the Supreme Court of Canada in this. Again, with great respect, I frankly think it's a bit naive to suggest that juries are going to be able to just ignore the prejudicial aspects of this evidence. But I think the bigger problem is that even if true confessions arise out of these, there's such a risk of false confessions and such a heightened risk of wrongful convictions that I simply cannot agree with the propriety of police being able to use this tactic. In my view, this technique is inherently unfair and undermines the justice system, and it undermines the very important principle that it's better for 10 guilty to go free than for one innocent person to be punished. So firstly, in my view, this technique is a backdoor way of letting bad character evidence in that should never be before a jury. It's a principle in Canadian law that a person should be convicted for what they've done, not who they are, and for that reason, evidence of a person's bad character is almost always inadmissible, but Mr. Big operations are full of bad character evidence. The whole thing is bad character evidence because it's showing, look, this guy's a bad guy, he wants to take part in this criminal activity. Secondly, it's clear entrapment in my view. It's coercing an individual to engage in crime, and it's highly exploitive because it is especially used and effective in targeting individuals who are socially isolated, lonely, who are poor, need money, unfairly takes advantage and targets these individuals and manipulates them. And that's why there's such a high danger of false confessions, because people will confess because they want to stay a part of this group that's actually given them a sense of belonging when they've probably been alone much of their lives. Which goes into my third point, that aside from being exploitive, it seems highly untrustworthy. There may be rare cases, like the case of Mac, where it actually is reliable, but in my view, a case like Mac is the exception that proves my point rather than something that shows these are safe. And fourthly, I personally never accept the argument that good ends justify evil means. The end does not justify the means. People, police, the state should only do good and not do evil. And fifthly, in my view, these sorts of techniques operate to undermine the public's trust in the administration of justice, and especially in the police. Because when you see police engaging in such underhanded tactics, it just makes people view police as those who are prepared to lie and steal and cheat in order to achieve their objectives. And how can you trust them in any investigation? That's the same reason why I strongly disagree with the court's long-held rulings that it's perfectly acceptable for police to lie to individuals in interrogations to try to induce a confession. I think there's one other way of looking at this. Even if we assume that criminals, suspects in criminal cases don't deserve to be treated well, don't deserve due process, I would still argue that this technique should not be used because of what it does to the police. What does it do to an individual to set aside morality in order to achieve a conviction? What does it do to an individual to have them lying day in and day out, pretending to be a criminal, pretending to hurt individuals, manipulating an emotionally vulnerable person? In my view, it doesn't do anything good to police officers. In my view, it makes police victims as well. And if for nothing else, for the good of police, and for the sake of allowing good men to stay good by acting good rather than acting evil, I strongly disagree with this technique. This video is not legal advice. If you're in a situation where you need legal advice, please contact a lawyer. You can call another lawyer or myself. My 1-855 number is below. And if you found this video helpful or informative, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing, as well as following me on Facebook and Twitter.